A lot of the times when anime... Wait, hold up. A lot of the times when anime gets a sequel, remake, or maybe an unnecessary new season over a decade later, things never look exactly like you remembered. Maybe the eye shape is bigger or there's a lot of shiny things added. And as surprised as fans get when designs don't look one-to-one, it really isn't that much of a mystery. A lot of the times it can just simply be down to a brand new character designer. Their interpretation is always going to be a little different than the last person. Heck, even if you get the same guy back, they're rarely going to draw the exact way they did 20 years ago because an artist's style is just always changing. And you know, even if you have none of those things, you get the same dude back and he magically draws no different than he did in 1986, the core team can also change up. Each animation director and animator can bring a radically different take to a set of designs. Take One Punch Man Season 1 and 2, and I guess we'll see again for 3, same character designer, completely different team. Or even Dragon Ball Z itself, an episode supervised by Yukio Ebisawa, looked pretty different than one by Masahiro Shimanuki, and Shimanuki's drawing style looked pretty different than Tadayoshi Yamamura's. However, Dragon Ball GT had none of that. Its first episode aired right after Z's last, had the same designer, Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, and essentially the same core team. I mean, there was a couple of studios that dipped out and there was some promotions and with that some swap arounds in different positions, but on paper this was the same crew. And it still looked quite different. For example, take the jawline. Often it was pretty sharp in Z, and although it did become less pointed over time, going side by side with these two drawings by Tadayoshi Yamamura, you can see the roundness to the lines. And outside pointy jawlines, or the lack thereof, highlights to the skin become common, heads also become wider, jaw length longer, as well as a rounder touch to the lines. The eyes as well are a bit smaller in size, and boy did those chins get big. And not just for the main cast, but the new characters as well. Like with every main villain of GT, I swear Nakatsuru is just trying to push how big he can make that thing. They also increase in width, a bit different than the look of the Buu arc, and well, certainly a world away from the Saiyan arc days. And yeah, that kind of goes for like everything. The noses become, you probably guessed it, wider and longer. It was a complete flip of the design principles from before, which leaned more towards big eyes, narrower heads with small to very small features depending on the animator. And with Toriyama's work, it was even more so. Now, we'll quickly mention that this isn't an absolute for every single drawing made for Z and GT. There are certainly stylistic exceptions. Again, I'll point out that every artist has their own unique take to a set of designs, some more unique than others. So the amount of features I've mentioned for GT may be more noticeable in one artist's work than another. Example, animator Akira Inagami, and who became an animation director in GT. Some of his drawings in later Z look very different from the Buu arc style and how rounded the jaw is and the big old nose, like it's pretty much identical to his approach in GT. Then Naoki Miyahara. In later Z, likewise went with rounder lines and rounder shapes for the nose. Kazuya Hisada, although drawn much sharper in Z, quite often could lean towards a wider look in the way he drew faces. Then on the opposite end, you have Noboru Koizumi's episodes, who, if you don't know, was One Piece's character designer. Yeah, I thought I'd chuck that in. The lines in his episodes were very sharp, but then again he was never too concerned about the character sheets. Then Tadayoshi Yamamura. Initially, he just kept drawing like it was Z for the most part. Some of those early episodes look really similar, like you could easily pass this Vegeta off from having come from the Buu arc, although over time he too embraced the thickness. And Uchiyama, he always drew round, and after a decade of doing it, you really think he was going to stop? So yeah, just wanted to put that out there, that I'm not saying these stylistic features had never appeared, but more so that they had never been all present at once. And two, I think it's important not to like overgeneralize like people so often do in art style and animation discussions and be like, this is the way Z always looked and this is how GT always looked, end of story. Because again, a lot of people work on these shows, so a lot of variety in approaches. But now that the differences have been established, let's look at the answer. How and why did it happen? Well, of course, the character designer Nakatsuru takes center stage in that discussion. However, talking about things changing, one change I've made recently is my internet habits. As someone who identifies as socially savvy, for the longest time I was browsing the web without a VPN. How dangerous. But now I'm secure. I'm protected from infected files. I'm protected from web tracking. I'm protected from intrusive and malicious ads. I am protected! By using NordVPN, you can have access to cheaper travel, which has made my dream of finding a Japanese wife possible, unlock content off limits to your country, quicker broadband, and a host of other benefits. NordVPN is more than just a VPN. So to get an exclusive deal on a 2-year plan, plus 4 bonus months free, go over to nordvpn.com/forgottenrelics. Now firstly, I'll point out that Nakatsuru was always known for his skill in mimicking Toriyama's work. However, now that the continuation of Dragon Ball's story and visuals would be in just anime form rather than manga, more than ever, it made sense to match the visual style to the authors as much as possible, to depict it like how Toriyama would draw it. But without any source material, of course, which he and many others would use to keep up to date. In this case, it would be up to Nakatsuru to interpret how Toriyama would approach things. And the first way he did that was through adding skin and hair highlights. Of course, if you've ever seen Toriyama's illustrations, they're everywhere, and in Nakatsuru sheets, they now would be as well, and would stick to Dragon Ball's designs going forward. And we'll note Nakatsuru did include them in some of his work on Z. Episode 120 is especially famous for them being everywhere, and so did Yamamuro, but skin highlights were never added to the character sheets, with exception to like Boo and probably another character I'm forgetting. Then there are the rectangle shaped heads. Toriyama for quite a while there went with the standard narrow triangular face shape for villains. You might have the one-offs like Nappa or something, but around the Cell arc and definitely in the Boo arc, that rectangular shape just became more and more common. And so again, Nakatsuru, seeing this trend in Toriyama's work, would likewise lean heavily into that specific shape when designing new characters. But for all the other art style differences between Z and GT we've gone over, it is a little less clear and a little confusing, because if you look at Toriyama's sheets and the illustrations he did for GT, you'll immediately notice the lines are sharp, the jaws are pointed, and that definitely didn't make its way into the show at all. So why would Nakatsuru, who obviously wanted to bring the designs closer to Toriyama's as much as possible, why would there be such a change for one of the most recognizable areas of Toriyama's work? Well, a part of that answer is that Nakatsuru always had a rounded style. Like, if you take his drawings from all the way back in movie 7, it definitely matches up to some of the stylistic notes I've given to GT. But again, that is a half answer, because if that's all there was to it, why would there be a difference between his sheets in Z and GT? Well, because Toriyama's style wasn't entirely consistent. If you look at his illustrations for V-Jump and the chapter covers, you'll notice quite often much rounder faces and different proportions compared to the manga panels. Example, take the cover of chapter 457. Matches a lot of what I've talked about for GT in terms of facial features, but if we go to the way Vegeta's drawn in the chapter itself, it's very different. And stay with me here because it gets a little less clear again, because even in the manga panels, the style switches up here and there. Now, it's no secret Toriyama's style changed greatly over the series, but I'm talking about like within the one arc. One trait that started to pop up was less definition between the side of the head and jawline. Dragon Ball characters for the longest time would have these strong curves defining the 2 points. It was a very stylized and simplified approach to drawing the head. But around this time, you started to get instances where that was simply gone, and instead it would almost be like a straight line. It was much more subtle. Then there's the chins. They were sometimes a bit wider with slightly straighter lines. Then jaw shapes for especially Piccolo and Vegeta become longer. For Super Saiyan 3, similar thing. And near the end of the arc, it starts to appear even in Goku's base form. Now, are curved faces and rounded chins gone completely? Definitely not, but Toriyama was going in a slightly more realistic take for the face. And honestly, I would say the first hints of this are in the Cell arc. For the anatomy though, such as those necks, it definitely does become pretty consistent. It's not noticeable at the start, but by the tail end of the Boo arc, that changes. It sits behind the ears now and points out. Funny enough, it's actually pretty similar to how it was drawn for Super Saiyan 2nd grade, except the traps are slanted down much more, the shoulders are drawn smaller, which also makes the traps look larger. And if we switch back to the character sheet of Baby Vegeta and some of Nakatsuru's key animation in episode 64, you can see he 100% brought that over, for better or worse. Anyways, Nakatsuru, of course, seeing these trends, even if they weren't all consistent, it was a pretty safe bet that if Toriyama theoretically did continue on with Dragon Ball, this would be the style that would be standard in time. And what's crazy is he was pretty spot on. Well, maybe not at first, as the main character for Toriyama's new manga, Alien X, releasing the same year as GT, 1996. Honestly, the head shape and eyes look more like Piccolo from the Saiyan arc or something, but the same year Toriyama would do some video game designs for Tobal 1. And it's all there. Features sit higher up, less curvature to the face, and going into the 2000s, that rounded touch to the lines begins to become a standard look for Toriyama's art. Don't know about the big noses though, those never really came. Guess that was just more a Nakatsuru thing, but pretty on point with everything else. So in summary, since there was kinda a lot there, with an added priority to bring Toriyama's style to the anime more than ever, and the opportunity to refresh the visuals being a new series, Nakatsuru would bring stuff over like highlights to the design sheets. Even the color palette would lean to Toriyama's work, with Goku having browner skin and Trunks' hair having a darker shade of purple, the usual color he would go with, but also without a manga directly to reference, it was up to Nakatsuru to interpret how Toriyama would draw things, which partially involved leaning into those trends Toriyama's work was beginning to go, as well as incorporate some new stylistic developments that appeared over the course of the Buu arc. And so with all that, even despite following right after, the designs changed quite a bit. And with that concludes the story of Big Neck Gohan. Still don't know why he went with those big noses though. So thank you everyone for watching, and of course, the elephant in the room. Yes, it was a Dragon Ball video. Someone made a suggestion about comparing GT and Z's designs or something like that in the comment section. Honestly, I can't remember who or which video, but I didn't feel like it was that interesting of a topic, to be honest, which is kind of ironic because I later realized I had already made a video like that years ago, but also had a light bulb moment and realized, why not talk about why there's a stylistic difference between the two? Seemed like a fun topic, and I was hoping to talk about DB again around this time with the supposed news about the web series that was meant to drop, and topics like this have gained interest in the past, so yeah, thought it was interesting and hope you enjoyed it as well. And of course, a big thank you to my patrons. But with that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.